Guys, let's talk about solving proportional relationships. So our goal is that I can write and solve a proportion and I can also use a unit rate to write and solve these proportions. So a proportion is simply a equation that states that two ratios or rates are equivalent. So for example, what I'm looking at is 1/2 is equal to 10/20. These two are obviously equal to each other. One just is 10 times larger than the other. Different numbers, same relationship. If you have a proportion, you can use the cross product property, and put property on this one, to simplify it, to do some more work with it, because there's a really neat idea. If they're equal, you can multiply them across, and they will be equal to each other. So what that says is if I do 20 times 10, 2 times 10 is 20, and then I do the same thing up here, and I multiply across here, 1 times 20, if they're proportional, they're equal to each other. If they're not, then I have to solve them. They're not proportional, they're not equal. But if they're proportional, I can use it if I'm missing a number to figure it out. And that's really what we're going to look at today, is if I have 3 of the 4 parts of a proportion, I can find the fourth. So for example, our first problem says after 2 hours, the air temperature had risen 7 degrees. So that's our first ratio. 2 hours, 7 degrees. So we're setting up our ratio as time over temp. So one of the things you have to do when you set a proportion is to keep that relationship time over temp the same. So the top on the next one has to be time, and the bottom has to be temperature. So as I read the rest, write and solve a proportion to find out the amount of time that it takes at this rate. This is the key right here. If it doesn't have something that says this or it says it's proportional, then you know you've got it. It doesn't always have to be equal, but that's the key to telling you it's equal. For the temperature to rise an additional 13 degrees. So an additional 13 degrees over that 7 would be 20 degrees. It's a little tricky, but you got to read it a little more carefully for that. So since I don't know the time, I'm going to put x here. I can put whatever variable I want, but now I'm going to use my cross product property and say, okay, 2 times 20 is 40. 7 times x is 7x. And now I have that equation that I was solving back in unit 3, and I divide both sides by 7. That's how I'm going to find out what x is. And when I do that, I find that it goes 5 and 5/7 hours. Put my label on that. Okay. Now I want you to go ahead and pause the video and figure out the second one. All right, now that you've taken the time to kind of work that one out, you get 4n equals 48. Then you divide both sides by 4 to get n is equal to 12. Okay? And that's exactly what it makes sense to be. So let's take a look at a slightly more challenging tile problem. If the ratio of type O to non-type O donors at the blood drive was 37 type O donors to 43 non-type O donors, how many donors would be type O out of 300? Now this is a different kind of ratio. This is a part-to-part ratio because it gives you each part but doesn't give you the whole. This is whole. It wants the part to whole. So we've got to match our ratios to have proportions correct. I can't do part to part. I've got to switch this completely and match that part to whole in my question. So when you do that, if you only have 2 parts, which we only have 1 and 2, we can add these 2 together to get my whole. So this would set up as 37 over 80 is equal to an unknown x over 300. So now I can cross multiply. Okay, 80x done is equal to 2 zeros. 7 times 3 is 21. Carry the 2. It's 9 plus 2 is 11,100. Now I'm simply going to divide both sides by 80. Now, you know the shortcut. Come over here, cancel out those zeros because you're really just dividing by 10. 8 goes into 11 one time with 3 left over. 8 goes into 31 now. That goes into 3 times with 3 times with 7 left over. 8 goes into 70 about 8 times. And we're going to have one more 0, so I'll put a decimal point. So that's 64, so that's 6 times left. 8 goes into 60. Roughly, 8 goes into 67 times. So we'd say roughly either 138 or 139 people were type O. And I take either answer rounding up or rounding down, just saying the same answer. It doesn't really matter. Okay. All right, it's your turn to give this one a try. Figure out if it's a part to part or part to whole, and then solve this proportion. All right, so this one calls for a part to part and a part to part because it never tells me a total here. It doesn't say what's the total here. So if I have 8 people over 3 cups, I'm going to set 14 people here over X cups. I don't know how many cups, but then I can cross multiply. 14 times 3 is 42. 8 times X is 8X. When I divide both sides by 8, I get for 14 people, I would take 4 1/4 cups of flour to make whatever this recipe is making. Probably some type of baked good with that much flour in it. All right, so let's take a look at another style problem. Now this one is another way, we're gonna look at another way to think this one out. Sometimes when our ratios become a little bit larger, it's worth taking a look at it and going to the unit rate first. So we look at here, Aiden bought 6 containers of yogurt for $7.86. 68 cents, sorry. So I want to relate cost C to yogurt Y. And I want to know how much he would pay for 10 yogurts. So our first step could be, okay, $7.68 over 6 yogurts is equal to X over 10. Now, one of the neat things about ratios is I can simplify. If I can simplify part of the proportion, it's still going to stay equal. So I can say, oh, I can simplify this because it's even and it adds up to 21. So it meets the criteria for it to be divisible by 6. So 6 goes into 7 once with 1 left over. 6 goes into 16 twice with 4 left over. 6 goes into that 8 times. So I can simplify this fraction to this. This makes our math a lot easier because I already have it at unit rate. So all I'm going to have to do is go X times 1 is X. 10 times $1.28 is $12.80. Could I do it the other way and do 7 times this and do 6X is equal to $76.80 and then divide by 6? Yes, perfectly fine. Same answer. X equals the same $12.80. But at times, it's easier to simplify it to the unit rate first. Okay? Go ahead and try this one, this time simplifying your given ratio to a unit rate. All right, so Ethan purchased 8 t-shirts for $64, so we're going to say 64 over 8. You could actually flip it and do 8 over 64. I'll go ahead and do it both ways as long as I keep my other relationship the same. I want to know how many t-shirts. So t-shirts was 8. I'm going to come over here and X. I'm going to put 10 here and X here. Doesn't matter. Now I can simplify this unit rate, either one of these down to, in this case, 8 over 1 or 1 over 8 because they're just flipped. Now when I cross multiply, again, I get that 1X is equal to 80. Here, if I did the same thing, X is equal to 80. So either way, 10 t-shirts is going to cost Ethan $80. All right, last one I want you guys to try. I'm going to have you try this one individually. I know it says my turn, but it's your turn to try this one. I want you to figure out how much money Austin would pay for gasoline. All right, so let's think this through. $31.12 for gasoline for 8 gallons. I want to know how much he's going to pay for 11 gallons. Okay? So this time we're going to C because it labels it for me C right here. So can I switch this down to unit rate? I can. 31 goes into 8 goes into 31. I could have done it that way, or I could have simply done it the other way. So we're going to do both ways just to show it. I get 8C is equal to, I'm going to use my calculator off screen so y'all can't see that. Pretend I'm not doing it. Equals $342.32. Or I'm going to do unit rate, 3112 divided by 8, and find out that this would be 329 over 1 is equal to C over 11. Either way, I've already now cross multiply here to get C is equal to 389, not 329, I have a mistake. $42.49, or 79 cents, I apologize. And if I came over here and did 342.32 and divide that by 8, I get the same answer as C is equal to $42.79. Either way works. It doesn't matter where, it's where you choose to do your division. Is it easier to divide 31.12 by 8, or is it easier to divide $342.32 by 8? Either way, you get the same answer. All right, now that you've had a chance to work through proportions, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help. Other than that, you're on your way.